Let's turn to Harry Nelson. He's an attorney, health law expert, and author of The United States of Opioids, a prescription for liberating a nation in pain. He joins me from Los Angeles. Harry, Johnson & Johnson says the company did not create this problem and litigation is not the answer. They plan to appeal. In your opinion, what are the chances their appeal will be successful and they can overturn this judgment?
I think that the appeal may delay the actual payment of money, but it's very unlikely that they'll be able to overcome this judgment. The judge provided 42 pages of documentation of Johnson & Johnson's central role in creating a massive amount of harm, both overdose deaths, people addicted in need of treatment, and enormous cost for the state of Oklahoma that makes me believe that Johnson & Johnson is ultimately going to have to pay up.
So they're fined $572 million. Is that sufficient in a crisis that has claimed lives, that has ripped apart families, or is that simply a slap on the wrist?
I think it's closer to a slap on the wrist. The reality is the amount of money that's needed to stem the tide of overdose deaths, to actually to protect and treat all the people with addictions and prevent more, is going to be many, many billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars. And so it's very nice that the state of Oklahoma achieved about $1 billion from these 3 drug companies, but it's just it's a small start.
So the Oklahoma case was a bench trial argued before a judge. Then there's one coming up in October, or several ones, in fact, in Ohio next month, that's going to be decided by a jury. Could we expect a different outcome?
So one of the most interesting pieces of this case is that Johnson & Johnson may have had some confidence that a judge was going to be less likely to make an emotional decision and more likely to stick to the facts, and that might help them. And what we saw is that the evidence is just so overwhelming of the harm in this crisis that even a judge issued over a $500 million judgment against Johnson & Johnson. So it's likely that that most of the drug manufacturers and distributors are going to be afraid of going before juries, which are going to be much quicker to turn to the emotional reaction and impose more damages for the harm caused in this crisis.
Harry, let me talk about your book. The United States of Opioids, a prescription for liberating a nation in pain. You believe the dialogue on this issue needs to be shifted. What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is that most of the coverage of this crisis focuses on the bad conduct by drug companies, and there certainly has been plenty of that, and sloppy prescribing practices by doctors. What I argue in the book is that it's a much more complicated picture that includes questions of a health system that does not provide adequate resources for public health, of a complicated relationship between insurance companies and doctors that drives a preference for pills, about a culture in America that prefers pills, and ultimately about a deep social crisis in America that shows up not just in opioid addiction, but in all kinds of other mental health challenges on the rise: suicides, anxiety, depression. And then until we begin to actually address those issues beyond our health system through broader community-based action, this crisis is just going to continue to get worse.
But Harry, there are a lot of people, responsible patients, who depend on opioids for severe chronic pain. What does it mean for them? What does this judgment mean for them?
Right. So it's a terrible time to be a person in need of pain medication in the United States. The climate in the United States, thanks to pressure from the DEA and state medical boards, is such that many, many doctors are just afraid to prescribe, and they'll hold their hands up and just tell patients that they can't help them. So it's a very, very difficult time. And one of the trickiest pieces of the opioid crisis is the fact that these medications do play a legitimate role. But at the same time, there are a lot of people who are using opioids for all kinds of pain that goes beyond what medication can do. Opioids, the preference for pills has led to more prescribing than is necessary, and my heart goes out to the families, to all the people who need these medications. But the bigger challenge that we have is, how do we find other kinds of pain relief? More other approaches that aren't medication to help these people.
Understood. Harry Nelson, thank you so much.